Okay, so welcome everyone to the Path of Awakening class on Luminous Emptiness. We could begin by bowing in.
Is that okay, Michael?
I'm going to remove it from myself because I like seeing everyone there. But everyone else can leave me spotlighted or not, as you wish. Before we begin talking about the text, I just want to acknowledge that we're actually in a bit of a bardo with the election tonight, that we are in between, and that we don't know how it's going to turn out. And we can see how easily that stimulates all kinds of hope and fear. And perhaps even with that, moments of equanimity and clarity and calmness. But it is a bardo of its own sort that they didn't have in Tibet because they did not have the type of government that we do. In any case, we should begin. So I have to say, if I were writing a book and I would want Francesca Fremantle to help me with chapter titles because I think her titles are really quite evocative. This is the third chapter explaining altogether what she means and why she decided to call this book, the Bardo Totral, Liberation Through Hearing, rather than in the Bardo, rather than the Tibetan Book of the Dead, although I'm so familiar with calling it Book of the Dead that I'll come back to that on my own. And this particular chapter is the Bardo, the experience of Nowness, and that is one of the key ideas that we're going to be working with tonight, and that will come up over and over again. This chapter presents kind of a whirlwind tour of the 6 traditional Bardos, and in more than one place, she lets us know that she'll be talking about some of the things that were being presented in this chapter in much more detail in further chapters. But just looking back, the chapter on liberation was actually Liberation Uncoiling in Space, which is a direct reference, it's a quote from Trungpa Rinpoche, but a direct reference to the capacity of mind to self-liberate, that by simply seeing thoughts as they are, rather than getting entangled, the thoughts naturally self-liberate, and that whatever concepts we bring to experience self-liberate, so long as we're able to rest in some kind of awareness rather than getting caught up in karma, which we talked about in the chapter previous to that. So the Bardo experience of Nowness, really this idea of Nowness is really key. That and the idea that in fact Bardo experiences are pervasive in our life. So I was thinking maybe a beginning actually with a little bit of contemplation and meditation that I hope will make clear some of the things that are talked about in this chapter. And I hope that what I'm about to do will be helpful rather than confusing. And I wanted to begin actually with a bit of informal contemplation in a sense, which is to say that in the Buddhist tradition altogether, it's said that the nature of mind is beyond expression and beyond analogy. Yet, to point something out to us and to try to help us understand, analogies are used to try to get something across of what is being discussed that's ultimately beyond concept, beyond analogy, beyond expression. And one of these is the notion of space, and that the nature of mind has some analogy to the nature of space. And so if we contemplate just for a minute what space is, how we experience space, and just think about that for a moment. I think for most of us, probably, that our first notion of space is just the place that we're in. It's bounded by 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor. And that's our notion of space, that it's tied very much to what we perceive visually. But if we think about it even just a little bit, we realize that space goes on beyond that. And that perhaps if we were to think a little bit more, we might think of our house or whatever structure we're in in terms of space. We might then think further of whatever location we're in, town, city, state, country. But if we just let our mind go and go, we realize that ultimately space is boundless. That whereas we can say that we're in this room, and we are, that's really a relative reference point. And that if we only think of space in terms of the room that we're in, um, it's a way of seeing exactly how reference points can bind the mind, that they limit us from seeing further. On the other hand, it's also true. As a relative truth, this is the room that I'm in. If we think even further about space, we might even come to think about the nature of objects in space and realize that having an object in space doesn't mean that there's not space there. If I were to move out of your screen, or if the four walls around me were to dissolve, or if I were back 100 years before this house was built, that space is there. And that space is still there, even though it looks to be obstructed by a solid object. So we realize that ultimately space is boundless, and that thinking of space in terms of reference point binds us to some degree. And so I'm hoping this analogy gives some sense of what it means when we're told that the labeling mind binds mind itself. Mind itself is one of the terms for the true nature of mind, like Rigpa or ordinary mind. That if we're not able to see through reference point to some degree, that we stay stuck in a concept about what things are. Let me see. I asked if I can turn up the volume. I don't know if that'll make a difference or not. Can people hear me okay? All right, I will try to talk louder. I am not blessed with a natural loud voice like my son was, that I heard every teacher in every teacher conference through 6th grade tell me, he's a good kid, but he does talk loud sometimes. In any case, the idea, I just wanted to say something about the idea of reference point, and how reference point is relative truth, very, extremely useful. It helps us navigate the world. We would literally be spaced out without some idea of reference point. It also shows, as is said in the teachings, that ultimate truth, which is that space is boundless. There's no center to space other than whatever center we create conceptually, usually based on our physical location. That there's no center to space, and that space is boundless, is the true nature of space. But that ultimate truth doesn't negate or refute relative truth. A relative truth can refute another relative truth. If someone believed that 2 + 2 is 5, and I could prove to them that no, it's 4, that's one relative truth refuting another. Ultimate truth doesn't negate or refute ultimate truth doesn't negate relative truth, but it does allow for some play or for some freedom when we're aware of it, when we're aware of something beyond just our usual fixed reference points. And it's said that, like space, mind is all accommodating, just as space accommodates every and any object, sound, smell, taste, whatever might occur in space. And that it's ungraspable, ultimately unpinpointable, although we do pinpoint through reference points. And that in itself, space is really nothing whatsoever that we can grab, and yet everything arises in it. Just as it says in the chant about the nature of mind, nothing whatever, yet everything arises from it. So I just wanted to say that because ultimately what happens with Bardo experience, when we're able to recognize the experience of Bardo, the experience of Nowness, it's an opportunity to let go. It's an opportunity to relax. It's an opportunity to wake up. And that letting go involves seeing the transparency of reference points. It doesn't mean that that we go into some kind of null space where we forget anything we ever knew. But it means we're not attached to, we're not bound to, we're not stuck in any one fixed point of view. So saying that, the next thing I would like to do is have us just sit for a few minutes, So if everybody could take a good posture, good seat. I know some of you meditated from 7 to 7:30, so this is either a bonus or whatever you might think. But take a good seat, square in the middle of the cushion, chair, whatever it is that we're sitting on. Straighten the back without forcing or being rigid in any way. Again, as you know, hands can be in any position so long as the shoulders aren't tightened or strained. And just begin to let go. Just begin to relax the mind. Relax the mind in simplicity, released from struggle and effort. And just settle into nowness, the space that we're in. Feel the breath. Work with the breath as a reference point to dissolve into nowness. Allow yourself to slow down. Just settle into this moment. Just let thoughts, feelings come and go without engaging in any kind of mental activity. Settle into nowness. And now a bit of formal contemplation. So remain in the space of nowness, the experience of here and now. And just look. What separates one moment from the next? Where's the boundary? Is there anything that we could pinpoint where one moment changes into the next? Just look at our present experience. Is it the same or different than a moment ago? What separates one moment from the next? Right. So, what I'm hoping some experience of is that on the one hand, there clearly are distinct moments. 1 minute we're talking about the election, 1 minute we're talking about the title to the chapter, One moment we're sitting thinking about space. One moment we're sitting and letting go altogether, hopefully. Next moment we're being asked questions about what separates one moment from the next. How do we define? And I think this is helpful in maybe, and again, I don't know what everyone's experience is. I hope people can come to discussion group tomorrow night because there'll be more time to talk about some of these things. But that it's kind of ungraspable. I mean, it's very clear conceptually in terms of past, present, and future. But when we really settle into nowness, what Trungpa Rinpoche called fourth moment, a moment that's not defined or bound by past notions of past, present, and future, it's clearly here. It's clearly we experience it. And it's really the only time when anything really happens. And yet we spend very little time aware of that. So, and that's really what I think the author and from Trungpa Rinpoche are really asking us to wake up to. That's why the chapter is entitled Bardo, the Experience of Nowness. So we should begin with the chapter, otherwise it won't be done. So again, this is a chapter where she defines or gives some sense of what Bardo is. And again, it includes a bit of a whirlwind tour through the six traditional Bardos. And again, she says something about her efforts as a translator to present Buddha Dharma to the West, and says that she expresses some reservation that she has in even using the term Bardo, because first of all, she says this isn't just a Tibetan teaching, that it actually originated in India and was transmitted to Tibet. And as she said, is thoroughly part of the Buddhism that was transmitted from India to Tibet. And she also says that the other reservation she had about using the term Bardo was that it might suggest something strange and exotic, something really external to us, something really unusual, rather than, quote, being a tool that is practical and accessible, unquote. And I think a lot of what's presented throughout this book is how to see Bardo experience not as something, again, exotic, external, far away, but something that we experience all the time. And that, in fact, if we wake up to it, is quite a powerful way of approaching a practice, and our lives for that matter. She says that it's not, that it should not be seen as only a mystical after-death experience, but as part of everyday life. And she says that it did at one time refer to just the period between one life and the next. And again, as a scholar then, talks a little bit about some of the history of the term, but very briefly, and actually this was interesting to me, but that at one time there was some dispute as to whether rebirth was immediate after a death or after a transitional stage, and that gradually it was expanded in people's understanding and through various teachers to the 6 or more states. And she said, really, you could interpret Bardo as any transitional experience. Again, we're going through an election Bardo right now, in between. But that the 6 traditional Bardos, again, this is a direct quote, the 6 traditional Bardos show how the essential qualities of the period between death and rebirth are present in other transitional periods. So that's the idea, is coming to understand something about this in-between state, not simply in relation to the period of time between death and rebirth, but now. So as she says, by refining further the understanding of the essence of Bardo, it can then be applied to every moment of existence. The present moment, now, is a continual Bardo. We're always in between in one sense. And we see that when we have developed some understanding of the relative nature of reference point, we could define in between any way we want. It could be between waking up and falling asleep. It could be between before and after breakfast. There are in-between states all the time. So it can be applied to every moment of existence. But there are implications about understanding Bardo depending on how we look at it. And here she gives a number of different ways of looking at or thinking about Bardo, that we could think of it as an interval. Although I think the best word is actually gap, which is a word that Trungpa Rinpoche used quite a bit in his teaching, and really, in particular, the gap between thoughts, the gap between when we have some sort of solid notion about who we are and what our world is, when that dissolves or collapses, and then before the next moment when we recreate something else, we recreate another drama. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the Bardo of life. So it can be a hiatus, a gap, it can be a link or a bridge, a meeting place that brings things together, a stepping stone. I think one of the key definitions, or one of the key ideas that she presents in terms of how to look at it, is that the Bardo is a crossroads where we make a decision about what path to take. And this is happening not just once, but all the time. Or a no man's land belonging to neither side. The Bardo can be a highlight or peak point of experience. And I think when we experience it that way, which she talks about a little bit at the end of the book, or sorry, the end of the chapter, about really intense emotional experiences, then we do have reference points to say, to bracket some point, something in our experience, to say that before, middle, and after. It can be a situation of extreme tension where we're caught between two opposites. It's like what's the song of the Clash, should I stay or should I go? And we go through these things quite a bit in our lives if we think about it. Should I stay or should I go? It can be an open state of neither this nor that. And she points out that the experience of Bardo might be very confusing or frightening to us, or it can feel incredibly liberating. It can be a moment where we're really open to new possibilities. And this can be, again, any kind of experience we could consider a type of Bardo, the beginning or end of a relationship, making any kind of major life decision, like buying or selling a house, leaving a job or starting a new job, any kind of change, like a graduation, a pregnancy, a serious illness, a sudden possibility of something somewhere. All of these could be likened to Bardo experiences, in that in each case there's a certain now, in-between state. And that these happen continuously in life, most often unrecognized. And to Trungpa Rinpoche, this was the inner significance of Bardo, that there are periods of uncertainty, openness, but uncertainty between sanity and insanity, between the confusion of samsara and the transformation of confusion into wisdom. And why is this significant? It's because when we're recognized, when we are able to wake up, when we're able to be in the moment, then we have a choice. We can let go. We cannot act in habitual ways. And it's really a question in recognizing the nowness of the present moment. Can we rest in mindfulness awareness and ride whatever uncertainty or intensity there might be? She quotes Trungpa Rinpoche that the Bardo are the heightened qualities of different types of ego, and also the possibility of getting off ego. That's when Bardo starts, the peak experience in which there's the possibility of losing the grip of ego and the possibility of being swallowed up in it. So it's between the end of one state of mind and before the arising of another, between one thought, when one thought dissolves, dies, fades away, and before the next thought arises. This is what Milarepa points out, between two thoughts, there is Buddha. Is that in that moment, there's a possibility of some kind of non-conceptual, open awareness. The past is gone, the future hasn't come. And we can't grasp that in-between moment, but it's really all that there is. It's that experience of nowness. Or as Trungpa Rinpoche says, in other words, it is present experience, the immediate experience of nowness where you are. And again, I think this is what happens to us in meditation practice when we realize we become lost in thought and forgotten the practice, and we can have the opportunity to come back. It's what happens in life when perhaps we're caught up in some kind of difficult situation, something that stresses us, angers us, frightens us, gets us overexcited perhaps. It can be any number of possibilities. And somehow in that moment we wake up and have a choice. And I think actually, this is one thing I did want to share, because it's a quote from Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche. So let me see if this will work. I was going to read it, but I think it's actually better if we all read it, because it relates also to karma. The karma may seem predestined, but that is only the case if we are unaware of the moment-to-moment experience of mind. Karma is constantly ripening for us, but how we respond and what we do with what arises is wide open. By practicing mindfulness and self-reflection, we become more conscious of our internal states and more aware of the danger of letting any negativity run free. There's not usually much we can do about the emotions and mental states that naturally occur in response to outer events. We don't have much choice about what initially arises in our mind streams, but what happens next can be within the realm of our choice. The wisdom of Dharma gives us a chance not to react, physically, verbally, or mentally, in a predictable and habitual manner. So that's the power of waking up in the moment. That's the power of recognizing Bardo experience. That we actually at any time could wake up. What we do in that period, in that moment of wakefulness, really depends on our state of being at the time. Traditionally, there are 3 different ways that in the Dharma of dealing with problematic circumstance, particularly kleshas, really intense kleshas, anger, desire, ignorance, and so on. The Hinayana approach is to avoid them, to try to not act on them. The Mahayana approach is to use some kind of remedy, some kind of contemplation, some way of transforming the situation, so that, for instance, a difficult state of mind might be a trigger for compassion, that we realize all beings suffer from aggression and passion and ignorance, and rather than giving into our aggression or passion or ignorance, we can actually use that recognition to use it as a method of generating compassion. And then the Vajrayana really comes down to recognizing whatever occurs as being no different than, or an essence of, the nature of mind. And in that way, letting self-liberation, letting things uncoil in space, and being able to recognize in just simple present awareness, just as it is, and realize that that's the true nature of our mind. So that's the power of recognition in the Bardo, and that's one of the points that gets made over and over, is recognition. Do we recognize where we are? Do we recognize what we're experiencing? And in each of the Bardos, there is that possibility. That is, through all 6 Bardos, there's that possibility of recognition, of not giving into karma, not giving into habitual mind and habitual reactions. In any case, there's 6 traditional Bardos. The Bardo of this life, or more traditionally called the Bardo of birth, the Bardo of dreams, the Bardo of meditation, the Bardo of dying, the Bardo of dharmata, or sometimes called the Bardo of reality, and what she calls the Bardo of existence, although more commonly I've seen it called the Bardo of becoming. They're distinguished from each other, and again, this is how do we separate these things out? What are our reference points? They're distinguished from each other because they indicate different modes of consciousness. The waking life and dream life are clearly different in our experience. Meditation and waking life might be different in our experience depending on the nature of our practice. She says they can be short or long, but they all have the powerful quality of in-betweenness when we wake up to that. By learning to see these stages of our lives as bardos, we can gain access to that power which is always present, unnoticed in every moment of existence. By learning to see these stages in life, of our life as bardos, we can gain access to that power which is always present, unnoticed in every moment of awareness. So what she's presented so far really cuts across all 6 bardos. Again, it comes down to the importance of recognition, waking up, realizing what our experience is in the moment, and being able to let go at that point, being able to let go of reference point, let go of habitual fixed mind, and just be open. And that each bardo presents that opportunity although as she says, most often it goes by unnoticed, which we certainly know from our experience in the Bardo of this life. And so in talking about the six Bardos, and again, this is kind of just a kind of a whirlwind tour, or like an appetizer for what's going to be presented in the rest of the book. She quotes verses from, she says there was another term of text called Natural Liberation, which included detailed practice instructions for all the Bardos that are summarized in a shorter text called the Root Verses of the Six Bardos, which she describes as concise verses describing the nature of each Bardo and how to wake up within each Bardo. She also links them somewhat to the six dharmas of Naropa, which is a whole nother topic, but it relates because all of the six dharmas of Naropa are also about how to wake up within these different experiences that we have in life, dreaming, death, die, and so on. So there is a relationship there, but in any case, there are instructions for practice in each of the different Bardos, but the question is always how to wake up within that Bardo. So she begins with the Bardo of life, this life, where we are now. And this is the Bardo that for most of us is probably our primary reference point in terms of how we think about these things. So these are the verses that go with it. It's in the book. Don't pay attention to Bardo meditation yet. Now when the Bardo of this life is dawning upon me, I will abandon laziness, for there is no time to waste in life. Enter the undistracted path of hearing, thought, and meditation. Making mind and appearance the path, I will manage the Trikaya. Now that for once I have attained a human body, this is no time to linger on diverting sidetracks. So again, this is literally the life we're in now. And Trungpa Rinpoche talks in regard to our experience in life, in our life, about how through speed we remain unaware of the nature of nowness in this lifetime. That this state is based or founded on speed. And basically what he's referring to as speed, I think we could think of in a couple of different ways. One is the speed with which we go from one thought to the next and just remain absorbed in some kind of distraction or some kind of dream, some kind of storyline about ourselves. But the other speed is the quickness with which we reify a thought, the quickness with which a thought arises and we take it as real, as significant, as having some sort of solidity to it that it doesn't. And it also relates to what he talked about in the Profound Treasury that we read some time back. If you remember, there were chapters about minute to expansion logic, how a single thought could just blossom into an entire world. And it's, for anybody who's practiced meditation for a while, it's not hard to see that. We can have a single thought, and if we engage with it, because in some way it seems compelling, enticing, interesting, worrisome, whatever it might be, once we engage, we can immediately develop a whole world and a whole drama very quickly, minute to expansion, and find ourselves completely distracted and lost in thought and dream. That's what he's talking about in terms of speed. It's the momentum that keeps things going, the momentum of one thought to the next, one belief to the next. And what this does is create an illusory continuity to our seeming existence. And the metaphor for that, which is used quite a bit again traditionally, is the notion of a firebrand. So if you've ever had like a flashlight, which is a more modern example, and you're in the dark and you spin the flashlight in a circle very quickly, it looks like there's a circle of light. It's illusory. It's not really there. But the momentum, the speed of one thing into another, creates an illusion of something more continuous than it really is. It makes the appearance of something seem real that really isn't. There's really not a circle of light. There's just moments of the flashlight, but because of the way our eyes work and whatever frame rate, I don't know what you call it, it appears as if there's a circle of light that does not actually exist. And it's exactly in that way that we come to believe in an ego, from moment to moment to moment, by just speeding along and not really paying attention to the moment. That speed is, as he says in the text, speed is necessary to maintain the illusion. That through speed we fill the gaps, and we fill the gap with distraction and absorption and all kinds of conceptual generalities. And it's the speed that keeps us believing in the solidity and permanence of the world. She says that the peak point of this Bardo is when a gap occurs, when our speed falters and the continuity is broken. Then there's a possibility of seeing through the illusion. This verse refers to the rarity of human birth, precious human birth, which we've talked about quite a bit. It also talks about hearing, it's hearing thought and meditation, but more commonly we call it hearing contemplation and meditation, which is how we develop prajna. And again, this refers to study as well as literal hearing. It's important to keep in mind that it's not like a linear process exactly, although it can work that way, but that actually each one feeds into the other, that what we study has some relationship to what we contemplate, and then what we actually experience in meditation, and that gets us to reflect back on our study and our hearing again. And so they're really interrelated kinds of processes. The most important thing with hearing is having an open mind, just being able to really hear things as they are without immediately coming to some conclusion. Contemplation is how we understand something about how it relates to us personally. And then it's in meditation where we might ultimately have some kind of an experience. She says at some point, the hearing and contemplating is helpful in that we can replace incorrect ideas we might have with something that is more correct from a Buddhist point of view. So for instance, if we understand something about impermanence, that would correct a view that somehow things are permanent, unchanging. Or we might begin to grapple with the idea of egolessness and realize something about logically that there isn't a self, that we're constantly changing, and that there's no one thing we can point to that's permanent or independent in our experience, that we can say this is a true self. It might seem like that in the moment, but that's again the firebrand, the circle of light that we see that isn't really there. And if we think back to who we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, childhood, we realize we're very different. There's clearly some kind of continuity, but at the same time, we're not the same. But it's actually in meditation where, she says, the rational conceptual aspect of the mind must let go, allowing a breakthrough into direct intuitive experience. And with that, there's a real change in how we see things and understand things. This is where there's a real change of allegiance to direct wakefulness. And that's what the meditation piece is really important. We've talked about that a lot before. But as she says, meditation means working directly with the mind and inner energies so that delusions are cleared away and the chain of karmic effect is interrupted. And the mind is transformed. This comes up again in the Bardo of meditation that we'll talk about in a moment. In each Bardo, the essence of the practice is to use the particular circumstances of that state as a means of awakening. So first of all, this means just the fact that we have a precious human birth, that we're not born into a realm where there's so much overwhelming suffering, or so much overwhelming pleasure and ease, in the case of the God and jealous God realms, that we have no interest in practice. We have no ability to practice because there's so much torment. What it says about mind and appearance is kind of interesting, because that really is one way you can actually explore the whole path, in that Buddhism has quite a bit to say. The Buddha had quite a bit to say about how things appear and how they actually are, and that those are not necessarily the same thing, but that basically in talking about appearances here, although it's easy to think of that in a visual sense, really talking about anything that arises in any of the senses. All of that is an appearance of sound, the appearance of mental objects, thoughts and feelings in the mind. All of those are appearances. And there are, again, different ways of working with mind and appearance as we go through the yanas. In the Hinayana, there's a lot said about the way that the mind is drawn to external appearances, which we take to be real, and desirable or undesirable. And out of that, we experience passion, aggression, ignorance, that we're naturally drawn to what's pleasurable, and that we try to push away what's unpleasurable. And that the more we look at the nature of experience, we able to realize that there, as we recognize something about egolessness, something about impermanence, something about the real nature of suffering, that we develop renunciation and less attachment to worldly activities, which is one way of understanding there's no time to linger on diverting sidetracks, as it says in the verse. With the Mahayana, we come to realize that the experiences, what we experience, all the appearances we experience are not separate from mind. That everything we experience is a reflection of mind. And we realize that our dualistic habit of dividing our experience into subject-object, me here, a real me here with real objects out there, is illusory. And it goes even further with the Vajrayana, where we see that all appearances are the spontaneous play of mind, that which is revealed by the Guru in direct transmission. And again, it's pointed out that this meeting of minds, where we realize that the Guru's mind is our mind, that this mind is actually beyond reference point, beyond boundary, beyond expression, beyond analogy, that this happens because we're in this Bardo where we have a physical body. It also talks about we talked about before, about the helpfulness of the physical body for just locating ourselves. That wherever mind goes, our body is here. So we're able to synchronize mind and body. We're somewhat more present, whereas that's not an opportunity we have in all the Bardas. And she also relates this experience, as in the verse, to the Trikaya. I will manifest the Trikaya, which again is the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and the Manakaya. But particularly in this context, she talks about the three dimensions of the awakened state. It's absolute empty essence that although we experience mind, which is more the experience of luminosity, that ultimately it's empty. We can't grasp the mind, we can't pinpoint the mind. It's light, and this is one of the ways in which it's space-like. It's boundless. We get bound up in reference points and think that it's graspable, but really we're just seeing some piece of the whole. And that this experience of the Dharmakaya, the absolute empty essence, along with the expression, its expression in luminosity, that's the way in which mind is different from space, is the knowing, clarity, luminous aspect of mind. And then its appearance in this world, so that we have emptiness, clarity or luminosity, and some kind of expression, traditionally called compassionate expression from an enlightened point of view. So anyway, by following the path, we come to realize that the true nature of both mind and appearance is the primordial state of Buddhahood. She then points out that the Bardo of meditation and the Bardo of dream occur within this life, that dreaming intensifies the illusory nature of life, while meditation presents a way of seeing life as it really is. So the next Bardo is the Bardo of meditation. And again, it will be, I think we will be reading about all of these later in the text in more detail. But the point is that meditation, as she says in the text, is a state of mind with greater clarity and awareness, different from our ordinary consciousness. It's a gap in the continual flow of confused thoughts. Now, from that point of view, we might say that within a session of meditation, if we sat for an hour or a half hour or whenever we do, that within those moments when we actually are able to experience with greater clarity and presence, that there are like a lot of mini sessions within a longer formal practice. Or we could say the whole thing is practice. Again, those are just relative reference points. But what it says in the verse is, now when the Bardo of meditation dawns upon me, I will abandon the crowd of distractions and confusion, rest in the boundless state without grasping or disturbance, and gain stability in creation and completion. At this time of meditation, one-pointed, free from activity, do not fall into the power of confused emotions. So we're talking here about being able to settle the mind, develop some some clarity of mind through the practice of meditation, by abandoning the crowd of distractions and confusions, which in the beginning may seem external, but we come to realize are actually our attachment to how we relate to our thinking process, and that external perceptions and things are merely the fuel that gets used to keep ourselves distracted, but they can also wake us up. Everything that can distract us could also wake us up. So ultimately, it really comes down to how we work with our mind. And I think for that reason, that's why she says that Trungpa Rinpoche interprets it not as formal meditation, but as a natural function of mind, that an innate intelligence which sees the clarity of things as they are. So that's why within an hour, say, of meditation, we have moments where that occurs, where we have moments where there's clarity, where we're present. And we know there's a difference between what it feels like to be present versus what it feels like to be distracted. And as we practice more and more, we become more familiar, more habituated to that, which is how meditation works over time, why a regular practice is so important. That we have moments of insight in meditation, but it's that increasing habituation to awareness, habituation to being present, habituation to nowness, familiarization with nowness. That's really, what we're doing. She says that although we experience these moments of openness, we often ignore them. And here again, we're talking about what we talked about previously with the speed of mind, the speed with which, rather than allowing ourselves to experience a gap, we fill it in, so that we aren't able to just simply rest in nowness. And when we practice meditation, what we do by taking a good posture, by finding a place to practice where hopefully we're able to abandon the crowd of distractions and confusions, we create an environment in which we're more able to recognize awareness. Because awareness is already there. What comes and goes, as Mingyur Rinpoche says, isn't awareness. What comes and goes is our awareness of our awareness, our recognition of our awareness. So, as she says in the text, experiences like these are brief glimpses of the boundless state, the true nature of mind. But we're continually distracted from it and confused by the disturbed emotions arising from ignorance, which is why it's important in this precious, rare human life to be able to practice so that we can settle the mind, that we can rest in simplicity, and develop the steadiness, the discipline, not to simply follow one thought after another, but to come back to the present moment, to come back to present mindfulness and awareness, and that develop the stability so that we can avoid the crowd of distractions and confusions. The verse specifically mentions stability in creation and completion, and this is a reference to two components of Vajrayana practice: deity meditation, meditation on deity. She talks about the importance of realizing the deities are nothing other than the expression of our mind, that they're not seen as external entities that are going to protect or attack us at all, but that the deities of the awakened state are synonymous with Buddhas, that the living presence of awakenment, of enlightenment in all its aspects. They are the meditative form of the practitioner's own awakened nature. That was a helpful way to think about it. That the deities are the meditative form of our own awakened nature. So basically, without going into a lot of detail, creation refers to the visualization practice where the ordinary world is transformed into some kind of sacred world, or is seen as a sacred world, and oneself is transformed into the deity as a self-visualization, which is one's true nature. And as she says, it's more than visualization. It really involves all the senses and the totality of the meditator's body, speech, and mind. So it's a complete imaginative identification, and which leads directly to some allegiance to wakefulness. It's like a very powerful way of directly connecting to wakefulness. As she says in the text, the actual feeling of the deity's presence and confidence in the reality of the deity's world are the basis of the meditation. So there's so there's that real developing a real feeling in the practice. This is all part of the creation part of really feeling a sense of the deity's presence, and also developing some real confidence in the reality of the deity's world. As she says, there's a lot of symbolic meaning in the iconographies, and this provides a direct connection to the awakened state of mind. So that all kinds of things would be an example, easy one. For instance, Avalokita, it's not a deity practice that I've ever done, but the depiction of Avalokiteshvara with hundreds of arms is a representation of his great compassionate activity and all the different skillful means of upaya with which he tries to benefit sentient beings. So the idea with the visualization of the details, it's a very quick way to tune into as a serve as a reminder of enlightened qualities. The practice of, she mentions this very briefly, but the idea is that in the creation of the visualization, this is the creation piece of the practice, sort of mirrors a process of birth, seeking a body. And so it's an imagined way of doing what actually happens in the Bardo of becoming. And then the dissolution of the visualization is like the death aspect of the Bardo dying, and then letting go completely with dissolution or completion is like resting in dharmata, resting in present awareness. So again, that's just a very brief description of what happens in creation and completion practice. But we can kind of see some of this, I think, in our, shamatha vipassana. We can see where we build up a whole fantasy. We can see where it all, and then we can just see through it. And that is in its own way. Not that when we get lost in thought, that's not deliberate, hopefully. But the dissolving is, and that does happen in a more direct way. I shouldn't say deliberate, I guess, because it's not thought out. We just see through it all of a sudden. And in a way that is similar, that has some similarity to the completion phase. Again, it's important to keep in mind in deity practice that the deities are not separate from oneself, and that they're not substantial. And again, the completion phase is a complete letting go. Visualization is dissolved into open, effortless awareness. It's just a complete letting go, complete relaxation of effort. And through that practice, we realize that we're actually creating our everyday world all the time with our confused, limited, as she says, dreamlike imagination. That through this very deliberate creating and dissolving of a world and a being or entity of sorts in creation and completion practice, it really helps to see how we in fact do this all the time, just in ignorance and through absorption and through following habitual patterns. So it really highlights that experience of really seeing through the illusory nature of what we ordinarily take to be real. As she says, in a very general sense, the stages of creation and completion are present in all aspects of life, and describes it as being like a learning process. That at first there's some effort and contrivance, which it clearly is with the creation phase, effort and contrivance. But then it becomes natural, unforced, and we can let go. And again, I think we experience something of that in just formless, regular shamatha vipassana practice, where there isn't any effort to visualize anything, but we just see. We see thoughts come and go. We see appearances come and go. We see sense perceptions come and go, and realize something of their illusory nature, and realize that whatever we experience is our mind. That whatever occurs is whatever appearance occurs is a reflection of mind, like a reflection in the mirror. The Bardo of dreams includes dreaming and also dreamless deep sleep. She says that falling asleep is a process analogous to death, Or we could say dying is analogous to falling asleep, I suppose. You could flip it around. But in any case, in both, what happens is the perceptions of waking consciousness dissolve and fade away. And she says that we think of this in our lives. We think of this as like falling into unconsciousness, but really the mind is resting in its most profound natural state, which we're unable to recognize because of our confusion, or as Zigar Konkol calls it, our deep mental fog. So we could read the verse on the Bardo of Dreams. Now when the Bardo of Dream is dawning upon me, I will abandon the careless, corpse-like sleep of delusion and enter the abiding state with undistracted mindfulness. Holding dreams, transforming emanations, purifying in luminosity, do not sleep like an animal, but treasure the practice that mingles deep sleep with direct perception. So what this is talking about, again, is, as she says, there's actually 3 instructions or 3 different ways of approaching this. One is illusory body practice, which is one of the yogas of Naropa. There's dream, and that's practice of luminosity, which are also part of the 6 yogas of Naropa. The illusory body is contemplating life as a waking dream, to realize that our whole subjectively experienced world is the creation of mind, just like an illusion. So it's similar to what we talked about in the Bardo of life with mind and appearance and deity, and also what we talked about in meditation. You could think of it as well in regard to the, one of the first Lojong slogans, regard all dharmas as dreams. That we come to some understanding of the lack of solidity, the dreamlike nature of our experience, which we might not experience in the moment, but if we reflect back to even what we were doing an hour ago, a day ago, it seems somewhat dreamlike. It's not solid, not tangible. And if we even, again, just look at our moment-to-moment experience and how one feeling dissolves into something completely different, one perception dissolves into some other perception, that it's a lot less fixed and solid than it seems. And again, what keeps that sense of solidity going, as Trungpa Rinpoche said, is speed. The speed with which we fill gaps, the speed with which we jump from thought to thought, the speed with which we take what we think to be real. So that's illusory body practice, that we just experience the subjectively experienced world is seen as the creation of mind. And as she says, this realization is fundamental to all practice related to the Bardos, that this seeing that whatever we experience is the creation of mind. That's part of the power of the deity practice, again, is to realize through visualization, which is a deliberate use of the mind's imaginative ability, we come to realize that in fact that's what we do all the time, and it helps us to be less solid in how we relate to things in our life. She says that dreams arise from karmic traces. That's things that arise out of the 8th consciousness. And she says they're hard to influence directly, but it's only after our intense, as she says, only after our intense attachments to our ordinary concept of reality is loosened does it become possible to perceive the world of dreams. And then luminosity practice involves recognizing and resting in the basic nature of mind, in its emptiness, radiance, and clarity. And she says that a momentary glimpse of luminosity occurs at the moment of falling asleep, just as it does at the moment of death. And the possibility of recognizing that is because in both experiences, falling asleep and in the dissolution of death, the senses draw inward. There's less involvement with, less being caught up in the external world. And that allows for a possibility, again, of seeing the true nature of mind, if we recognize it, if we are able to be in nowness so that we wake up rather than just either panic or fall into some kind of ignorance. Talks very briefly about dream yoga or lucid dreaming, where we actually develop the awareness within a dream that we're dreaming and then can influence what happens in the dream, which happens if we have some awareness of what's happening now in dream life, that we can recognize dream as dream the moment it arises, and then we can control dream events. And again, this is in one sense no different than what Zigar Contral was talking about, that we talked about earlier. It's waking up in the moment and realizing I have a choice right now. I can do something different. I don't have to just give in to the speed of habit and the momentum of karma. But the other useful aspect of contemplating dreams, and this comes up again in the teachings, is again through understanding something of what we experience in dream, that we can understand something of what we experience in this life. And what that means is we experience things in a dream that we take to be real. We run from the monsters, we're passionate about a lover, we're happy with, whatever good thing might happen in a dream. It's because we take the appearances in a dream to be real. When we wake up, we realize they're not. And we realize that, in fact, everything we experience in the dream is mind, that there is no, even though there's a sense of I and other, subject and object in the dream, it's all created by mind. It's all one thing. And it's said that there's no difference between that and our ordinary experience in waking life, and that the sense of duality that we develop, or we think I'm here and that there are real objects out there, that's illusory. It's not real. That everything we experience is a reflection of mind. And in that sense, the dream experience and waking life experience are the same if we wake up to it. And that's why, as she says in the text, Trungpa Rinpoche emphasized the dreamlike nature of ordinary life, how we continually create an imaginary world out of concepts, desires, hopes, and fears. And again, just as we take what we perceive in dreams to be real and external, when in fact it's all mind, so we experience the same misperceptions in waking life. And again, the key is finding the gap, the intense in-between quality of its particular state, and feel vividly the confusion between waking and sleeping. And through that, maybe just catch a glimpse of our uncertainty about what we really are, which again can be frightening, or it can be opening. It can feel liberating, which is the point of all Bardo experience in any of the 6 Bardos. As she says in the text, dreams seem real when we're dreaming, so how do we be sure that waking life is not the same as a dream? And this kind of uncertainty can act as a sudden inspiration to let go of all fixed concepts, and may enable us to break through for a moment into the open space of luminous emptiness. So the next 3 Bardos all relate to to dying, the period after death, and the approach to rebirth. And this is obviously going to be explored in great detail later in the text, so I'm just going to go over them very quickly. The Bardo of dying. Now when the Bardo of dying is dawning upon me, I will abandon grasping, attachment, and the all-desiring mind. Enter undistracted the clear essence of the instructions, and transfer into the space of unborn self-awareness. As I leave this conditioned body of flesh and blood, I will know it to be a transitory illusion. So again, with this Bardo, as with the others, there's again the importance of seeing the illusory nature of the things that we ordinarily take to be real. The Bardo of dying involves a dissolution, or a real breaking down of the 4 elements in the body, from solid to increasingly less substantial. And as she says, it seems to be a unique and final event. And I think in terms of our physical body, it clearly is. There's no question about that. But this transformation process is taking place all the time, that we're always changing. And if we really look at it with a mind of now, at our experience when we go from one situation to another, we see that there's some kind of dissolution. We see that there's some kind of need to let go of grasping and attachment and the all-desiring mind. The thing that comes to mind as I'm saying this is remembering a few years back when I retired from my job, and that there really was this letting go of, a lot of stress, but also a lot of people that I cared about, and a lot of things that I put a lot of energy into, and you could just feel it all beginning to melt, beginning to dissolve away. And I mean, it was a good thing, but it was also a sad thing. It had both. And any kind of change like that, there's this dissolution, letting go, and that the instruction is to recognize where we are, what we're experiencing, and to let go of grasping and attachment and the all-desiring mind, and just experience things as they are. It doesn't mean don't be sad. It doesn't mean not to feel or not feel anything, but just simply to rest in awareness of it all as we go through the experience. The point is that we're always, moment to moment, experiencing some kind of letting go, some kind of death, some kind of dying light process. Again, obviously the death of the physical body is another greatest level of that, because we're so attached to our body. But as she says, whenever we have the feeling of something coming to an end, or of trying to hang on to it, that is a taste of the Bardo of dying. Maybe it's easier to see in big events, if we have children, when they move out, when we leave, again, when we move to a different place, when a friend moves away. But, we do experience something of the Bardo of dying all the time. When it comes to the death of the physical body, it's said that at the final moment of dissolution, the final letting go of the elements, there's earth into water, water into fire, fire into air, air into space, space into consciousness. The luminosity of death appears to all beings as a peak moment when we're caught between the desire for continued existence and the fear of annihilation, as she puts it. And she says to ego, there seems to be only two extremes, existence and non-existence, and with that, ego blacks out. But the instruction here is transference. That's what it means when it says transfer into the space of unborn awareness. If we can recognize where we are, if we can recognize what we're experiencing, and if we can really let go of grasping and attachment, we might recognize luminosity and just be able to rest in the awake nature of mind, or at this point through transference. And again, these are the practices of ejection of consciousness, to attempt to project ourselves into a pure land, a pure land of Amitabha in particular, where it's said that practice and realization are much easier to obtain. The Bardo of Dharmata, when we don't recognize, we enter the Bardo of Dharmata. Now when the Bardo of Dharmata dawns upon me, I will abandon all projections of fear and terror. Recognize whatever arises as the self-display of awareness, and know it to be the visionary nature of the Bardo. When the time comes to reach the crucial point, do not fear the self-display of the peaceful and wrathful ones. So this is where we experience the visions of the peaceful and wrathful deities. As she says, the gap is where one thought has vanished, but another has not yet begun to arise. But if we don't recognize whatever we experience at this point as the nature of our own mind, and we take these experiences to be truly external, then we can't relate to them because we're seeing something that's, in a way, that's a misperception. Basically what happens in this Bardo of Dharmata is the mind is plunged, she says, into its own essential nature of luminous emptiness, which is identical with the nature of all phenomena, and the peaceful and wrathful deities appear as the ultimate manifestations of ultimate reality. Because we retain a sense of self, because we still have we're clinging to duality, a perceiver and perceived, we don't recognize the deities as our own nature. We think of them as separate, different, external to us. And we fear them because we see them as separate and external. Particularly the wrathful deities are wrathful. But even the peaceful deities, it's said that they're so brilliant that we turn away into some kind of dullness or ignorance because we don't recognize their true nature. We turn away from the brilliance, just as in real life, or I shouldn't say real life, in waking life, we don't recognize gaps. We don't recognize the brilliance of our basic true nature of mind, and we turn away from it and find ourselves caught up in the speed of thoughts and karmic momentum and all of the things that we get distracted by and absorbed in and caught up in. But here again, the basic instruction is simply to recognize them as they are, recognize that, and thus be spontaneously self-liberated, which is exactly what we do in meditation practice when we recognize thoughts as thoughts, in sitting meditation. If we take thoughts to be more than just a passing experience, we get caught up in things. We get caught up in our visions and our dreams and our hopes and fears. But we're able to just see thoughts as thoughts. It's easier to just let them go by and just be with them without having to take any action for or against. Not recognizing, as she says, not when we don't recognize the deities, particularly the peaceful deities, as expressions of our mind, the messages become more intense. The way that this was once presented to me, the experience of peaceful and wrathful deity. It's like in life, we have gentle reminders to wake up. Sometimes we just wake up spontaneously because of our practice, and because fundamentally we wake up because it's the true nature of our mind. But when we ignore these messages or try to get past them, sometimes we get harder messages. We get speeding tickets, or we bang our head on the door because we weren't paying attention. And that I'm not saying that's the same as the wrathful deities, but it's something like that. When we ignore the gentler messages, we get harder messages, as if mind was trying to wake itself up. Anyway, the final Bardo is the Bardo of existence, or the Bardo of becoming. She likes Bardo of existence better, but I actually like Bardo of becoming. Anyway. So the verse says, "Now, when the Bardo of existence dawns upon me, I will hold my aspiration one-pointedly in mind and strive to prolong the course of good karma. I will close the womb door and remember resistance. This is the time for strength." I missed a word there. Strength of mind, I think, and pure vision. That's a Freudian slip if there ever was one, though. Abandon jealousy and meditate on the Guru as mother and father, father and mother. So again, the point here is just realizing where we are. What happens in the Bardo of becoming is, as the Bardo of Dharmata fades away, our experiences become even more and more confused and frightening. And we're impelled onward by our karma. This the wind of karma, but it's like a powerful gale force, hurricane force wind that just pushes us on, which is sometimes how we experience our lives now. And with that, we pursue rebirth. We fall back into our habitual manner of perception. We fall back into a strict sense of duality, I and other, and we grasp the opportunity to enter a womb to be reborn. But there's still instructions to avoid rebirth. This is what, in terms of close the womb door and remember resistance. There's still the possibility of waking up and directing ourselves either to a pure land of the Buddha, or at least to a better life, a better rebirth in whatever we end up choosing. She says in the text that we should try to perceive everything we experience as the pure land of a Buddha, and resolve to retain that perception in the next life. And we should look at our mother and father as our guru or chosen deity. And it's in this Bardo that we most vividly experience karmic cause and effect, although it's present in all the Bardos. But just as everything is dissolving away in the moment, so is it also re-emerging, re-arising. And again, as with all the other Bardos, it comes down to, again, recognizing the moment, the experience of now, and being able to open up to the uncertainty, the confusion, whatever we're experiencing, and open to the freshness of the moment, rather than continuing habitually. So there's one last section. Slow down for just a second. All right. So the last section, she talks a little bit about the Bardos in relation to the six realms, which is how Trungpa Rinpoche sometimes taught about Bardos. And she says, like the six Bardos, the six realms have different qualities or flavors, however we might think of them, whether we think of them as states that last for a defined period of time, or the essence of those states. And that Trungpa Rinpoche related them to the six realms, which similarly represent different modes of consciousness. There's a mode of consciousness is the animal realm that's different from the mode of consciousness characterized by aggression and fear in the hell realm, for instance. So there are different modes of consciousness, But there are also 6 possibilities of rebirth, and we can also think of them as different states of mind that we experience as we live in this human realm. But the point that she's making is when the characteristic energy of whatever realm we're in, human realm or whatever experience we might have, hell realm or hungry ghost realm or God realm or whatever realm we might experience, when it becomes especially intense, it really can build up into a crescendo that has the nature of Bardo. And the experiences of the 6 realms, she says, the experiences of the 6 realms and the 6 Bardos don't exist by themselves, but in each case they arise ultimately from the open space of the primordial nature of mind. So again, whether talking about the 6 realms or the 6 Bardos, it really comes down to recognizing our own mind and recognizing the true nature of mind. Luminosity is the aspect of mind that gives rise to all these appearances. All these appearances, nothing whatever, but everything arises from it. It's the environment that surrounds them, out of which they emerge, into which they dissolve. And as she says, this true nature of mind is like a sun that's hidden behind clouds. It's always there, but the clouds, which could be our sense of self, our clinging to ego, our clinging to the appearances that of samsara, that's what obscures it. But that every now and then there's a gap in the clouds. Every now and then we have a moment of potentially waking up. So a gap opens through which we can glimpse the light of reality. And sometimes this gap is brought about by the intensity of emotional experience, which, as she says, also invokes its opposite, interestingly. Just Trungpa Rinpoche says it's like being hit with boiling and freezing water at the same time. But if we really think about our experience, that sometimes intense love can involve the potential for real hate. Fear and, the things we desire can also be things we fear. But the point is that when there's this real intensity of experience, particularly in this, our experience of the 6 realms, that there is the possibility of waking up. There's also the possibility of not waking up and falling into habitual pattern and doing all kinds of things that just further keep us trapped. But the point is, again, if we can catch that moment of intensity, there's a lot of energy in some of these experiences, and things can become very clear. And if we're able to let go of whatever fixations, whatever fixed ideas, whatever reference points, concepts that may be fueling aggression, there's really a possibility of waking up. Sometimes a gap occurs through which we glimpse the light of reality. The gap is brought about by the intensity of the emotional experience. And at that very moment, there's nothing to do but let go. Give up trying to hold on to one extreme or the other. Abandon the battle between good and bad, hope and fear. And so there's always the possibility in the midst of an everyday life situation, or in the height of some emotion, that we may suddenly catch a glimpse of the essential emptiness and luminosity. She talks about that entering the awakened state of mind is always preceded by an experience, however fleeting, of extreme contrast and conflict. And I could probably point out that the contrast piece there, and conflict. So, for instance, when we're in sitting meditation and we realize that we're thinking, we realize we've gotten lost, there's a contrast there. There's a contrast of awake versus dreaming, a contrast of being present versus being completely numb or caught up in something that's not real. And sometimes there's conflict. Sometimes it's, sometimes we're able to really let go into thought. Sometimes there's a momentum or an energy or a draw. And even though we've woken up for a moment, we don't follow it. We end up getting caught up in thoughts again. Even if it's thought of self-judgment about, why aren't I a better meditator? So the point is, in that moment of peak intensity, there's contrast and conflict, and we can wake up. We can simply be present at that time. That she says that in general, and this is definitely true if you read biographies of different teachers in the Buddhist traditions, that paradoxical situations and paradoxical statements that confound the rational mind, that the rational mind can't reconcile, can shock us into some kind of a breakthrough. That's like, and the example is Talopa slapping Naropa with his sandal. Did he wake up? But the point is that these kind of gaps, what it does is it creates a gap in our conceptual mind. It creates a gap in the momentum of karma, the momentum of one thought leading to another, so that we just stay absorbed. And as she says, even in ordinary life, gaps of this kind can occur. Sometimes we may become exhausted and just let go. Or we could just watch TV or do whatever we normally do to numb ourselves out. But there's that moment, there's that possibility. It can happen in extreme emotion, where time seems to stop and we can actually just let go and feel a sense of calm and stillness. And with that, we enter a different dimension of being. And we experience this perhaps briefly in our lives, but we do experience this. She says, without training, it's impossible to stabilize these experiences and take advantage of the opportunities they present. To be able to recognize and use these experiences of heightened intensity requires the firm foundation of a calm and steady mind and confidence in the basic sanity and goodness of our own nature. So, once again, we're being urged to practice meditation. That's how we develop the calm and steady mind, where we're able to see these things, accommodate perhaps even the intensity, and not get swept away by it. We're able to recognize rather than just be caught in the flow and swept away. As she says, all the instructions concerning all the bardos basically deal with allowing that gap to open, we let go, allow that gap to open by undermining our belief in the ordinary world that we take for granted, and then letting go into the space beyond that. And she ends by saying, quoting, she says, the Bardo experience is a doorway to awakening that's always present. And quotes Trungpa Rinpoche, that in fact, Bardo is a very practical way of looking at our life. So, that's the end of the chapter, and it's the end of everything I've thought of saying. So we have a gap of 2 minutes. So it's not much time, but if anybody does have a question or something they'd like to say, we have a little bit of time for that, not much. Or perhaps we should just rest in the gap.
I'm struck by, at least my perception, that it seems like there's this, for lack of a better word, tension. Like on the one hand, we're to be mindfully engaged with what's happening at any given time.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, so we're supposed to be engaged with it, yet on the other hand, the engagement helps us to recognize kind of the, whatever word you want to use, the impermanence of it, the emptiness of it. It seems to me like almost like a paradox in a way. You know what I mean? Like we use the body, we use the illusion of separateness, and we get in touch with our awareness of those things as a way to, for lack of a better word, transcend those things. Like that's the only way you can do it. That makes sense.
Well, however we relate to the gap sort of depends on our state of being at that time, and sort of where we are there's a lot of different causes and conditions. But I think essentially, in terms of what we're talking about, it's being able to accommodate without acting for or against, and then just seeing through, seeing the illusory nature, or what people used to call the transparency of thoughts, that they're there but not there at the same time, in the sense of not necessarily compelling or taken as real. So it is a bit paradoxical, and it's something that we develop, I think, over time through practice. But I think at this point we probably should close, dedicate the merit, because we're already past 9 o'clock, and we have to continue our passage through the election, Bardo.
Okay, we'll close with the dedication of merit.
Don, unmute yourself.
Okay, we'll close with the dedication of merit. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much.
God.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. It was just terrific.
Good night.
A great alternative to sitting in front of CNN.
Yes,
Indeed. Indeed.
as
Thank
always,
you
Matt.
from that.
That was terrific. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
It's really beautiful. Thank you.
My intention is not to stay up late. I'll work with the Bardo of dreams if I have to.
Better that. Better that.
Oh, God. Living
I'm
in
going
this
to work with Bardo of no media.
Exactly.
Oh, boy. That's where I want to be. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Yeah, good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night, everyone.